once again, Suburban readers and viewers. Welcome to the Suburban On Air and our broadcast of Beyond the Pages, where we try to take you behind what the front page stories are. Very special guest and a very special friend and a man who's so important to the Montreal community is with us today. Niemi is the founder and executive director of CRARR, the Center for Research Action Against Racism. With Fo, with others like the Reverend Beryl Gray when he's in Montreal, one of the great, not the great times, but one of the most important things we've done, I believe, at the Suburban in my 13 years there, is the number of cases we've taken on publicly where it was clear that actions by security authorities were taken against citizens who had done nothing other than be a citizen of color. Some of these cases were brought to my attention by Fo, others we did jointly with Reverend Gray. Others we did in concert at the same time. And it's been one of my great sources of pride what we've been able to accomplish. But what Fo has been able to accomplish in a career spanning almost 25 years, if not 30 years, on the question of stopping harassment of citizens simply by the color of their skin in all aspects. But clearly the most important one is the relation between citizens and police. If there is one place where we can perhaps bring to fruition Reverend Martin Luther King's dream of the time when a person will be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin, it is in that direct one-to-one relationship. And as a child of Côte de Neige and growing up there, I used to see this kind of discrimination constantly. Fo, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, the issue today on the table, of course, as many of our listeners and readers have seen over the past few days and months, during a time like COVID, people tend to think that everything's frozen up. But as constitutional lawyer Julius Gray has said, the Charter of Rights has not been repealed and the rule of law has not been suspended. And we tend to forget sometimes and put in a secondary position that during these times, authority, particularly security authority, still has to be held to account. Now, of course, that was not forgotten during this period because of the George Floyd murder, the subsequent North American demonstrations, indeed worldwide demonstrations, finally for racial justice, particularly in our public authority. And we had some movement on this at the municipal level where we were promised consultations that didn't occur, where the city of Montreal ordered its police not to randomly stop citizens without observable facts. I know that we were waiting, and I know that you particularly were waiting for a similar move from the provincial government, a similar public consultations that didn't happen. And just the other day, of course, they came out with almost a carbon copy of this very general statement that people shouldn't be harassed unless they're observable facts. Aside from the fact, and please address it, that we have not had public consultations from either level, why is this observable facts not tough enough? Why is it not concrete enough?
Well, as you know, there's in recent months there have been a lot of upheaval in the world, at home and in Montreal and around the world. With regard to the issue of policing and police-race relations, we've seen a lot of movement, in part due to, of course, the George Floyd murder. But one of the things that a lot of Quebecers and us in Montreal we have forgotten is that since Christmas, this Quebec government has launched an overhaul of the Quebec Police Act. It's only like every 2 decades the Police Act has to come up for a comprehensive overhaul and review. Last Christmas, 2019. Right. The process started, and there was an advisory community input and representation, and that process will begin, I believe, in the fall, where communities will be consulted. And at the same time, at the municipal level, there's been, as you know, racial profiling has made headlines day in and day out. So finally, the Montreal Police released in October a report, a study that it commissioned that groups in this city experience a disproportionate level of stop and basically is checked by the police. We're talking about street checks of pedestrians, not of drivers. So we are now facing a basically last July, the police came out with a policy on street checks, and there would be a public consultation on September the 1st by the Montreal Public Security Commission for the people of Montreal to basically participate and make comments on that. Lo and behold, on Friday around 6 o'clock, the Quebec government released a policy on practically on street checks without any fanfare, without any public consultation or notice. And this policy on the part of the Quebec government is pretty much the same as a little bit better written than the Montreal police policy. But it contains pretty much the same thing. And this is why, both in terms of content and in the process, I think there's a lot to discuss and a lot to ponder as to what is going on in terms of the way that policies are being made at the city level, at the provincial level, and how people are left behind and left out of the entire process.
One would think that the words observable facts would speak for themselves. Before somebody is stopped on the street, they should be seen to be, I don't know, perhaps staggering around if they're drunk or if they're high, or trying to enter a store or a doorway clearly without a key. An observable fact. But the Quebec wording at the end of it, at the end of the directive, has some generalities that seem to imply to the police officers, well, observable facts, but be reasonable, and you can still use some of your judgment. Is that a problem? Is one part of the statement contradicting the other?
Well, that's one of the issues I mentioned to be debated with this policy. There are certain sort of vague, even sometimes contradictory things in this policy in terms of the substance of that. That can raise some constitutional issues. As you know, when we deal with police, you have to be extremely careful whether in terms of the powers of the state through the police officers and the fundamental civil rights and the liberties of ordinary people, of citizens, residents, and whatnot. So this policy, unfortunately, seems to be a little bit skewed in favor of the police by giving them certain powers that I believe will be eventually challenged. Because it's opened the doors to abuse, and we can get into some of the details of this policy. But more important than that is that this policy is flawed in the sense that it deals strictly with street checks, and it does not deal with driving while black issues. And most of the time, racial profiling, particularly of black people, is done through basically stop and checks of vehicles.
And we certainly covered many of those stories that you've brought to light, and you've properly won your accolades and awards from our society for it. But I remember very well one particular case of, I believe his name was Jean Noel or Jean Denis Bellefeuille, who was stopped three times in LaSalle. It's a case you brought to light. And the police officers had the audacity to say, well, okay, I see your identification. It's your name, but your name is number one. Tu Québécois, he was of Haitian origin, and number two, you're driving a very fancy car. And to the same man, this happened three times. And one would think that would be the first thing Quebec or Montreal would want to address. How tightly worded is that street checks? I mean, can the wording not be expanded to make an argument to the police that, hey, we know why this is being done, and no more Bellefeuille episodes, please?
Well, this is where the authority is playing ping pong. Whether Montreal Police release its policy and street checks, there were a lot of questions asked about what about driving while black? What about the, stopping vehicles under the Highway Safety Code, Section 636? The city of Montreal, the police chiefs mentioned that, well, it's a provincial law, so it's up to the Quebec government to act on that. We only focus on what municipal police officers in Montreal can do and cannot do. And unfortunately, the Quebec policy that came out 2 days ago does not address this issue of driving while black. This is why a lot of people in the black communities will certainly feel very, very, very disenfranchised with the new policy, because it is two sides of the same coin. But Quebec policy, the Montreal police policy, despite of it's on the table, it still doesn't address the issue that is most possibly annoying and most disturbing to a lot of black people in Quebec when they drive, whether a fancy car, a rented car, or an ordinary car, is this habit of stopping them and questioning, among other things, whether the car belongs to them. usually the beginning of an escalation that can lead to a black driver being arrested and being fined thousands of dollars and facing all kinds of criminal charges. So we have basically right now a flawed policy making process, and in the policy that is on the table, particularly in the Montreal policy that is going to be the focus of public consultation on September the 1st, there's still things in there that we need to really look at, because in a sense, it still gives a police officer wide powers that can jeopardize constitutional rights.
Well, I think I know where my some of my first phone calls on Monday and Tuesday are going to be is to the police authorities and to ask them. I wonder if I'm wasting my time asking them, you know, Commander Caron, does not this wording automatically apply to people driving while black? What would he tell me? Do I have an argument to make with him?
Very likely he said, oh, look, that's in the provincial highway safety code, so that talk to the Quebec authorities where the city police and the policy does not cover that.
Okay,
but the Quebec policy does not cover that either.
You're the city police, fine, but you've already taken an observable facts position. Why are you not taking? Why would you make an argument to exclude people behind the wheel? Or in Mr. Godfrey's case, was just in sitting. The car wasn't even in motion. It was in a parking lot, in a shopping center, in a strip center in Laval.
Well, this is a $1 million question that we have to ask. You know, the ironic thing is that, look, the September 1st consultation will be taking place at City Hall. I mean, on Zoom, of course. But the Quebec government came out with a policy 2 days ago, mirroring the Montreal police policy. So the question is, what's the point of having a consultation when the Quebec government has already decided that the Montreal draft policy would have to be in line with the Quebec policy? It's basically like either it's the Quebec government has acted as a way to rubber stamp and approve the Montreal draft policy, or it's one way for the Quebec government to say that we decide, and you at the city of Montreal and the people of Montreal, you follow what we decide for you, and without your input and your participation.
Now, this is not to say that at these consultations, someone like you is there, that the city cannot be moved or the province cannot be moved to broaden the gambit of observable facts to include people in their cars. That the possibility for expansion and reform is still there.
Well, we would have to certainly to make this that recommendation, and also recommendation of other change in the Montreal police policy. But as you know, Montreal cannot, quote unquote, make a policy that was already decided by Quebec. So Montreal, I foresee that the city of Montreal would eventually make recommendation to Quebec in order to change its existing policy that was released 2 days ago, and that process can take another year or so. And this is why it comes back to the issue as follows. Do our city councillors, does the Montreal City Council really have a say in deciding the orientation that our police department works and the police practices, particularly in relation to the black people of the city of Montreal? Basically, what we see right now is no, because it's Quebec government that will decide what the policy shall be. And it has decided 2 days ago as to what kind of policy on street check that there shall be.
On your point, though, of what can Montreal decide? So through this pandemic, I've had occasion, endless times, to speak to police officers and their commanders. Because as you remember, through the summer, we were getting story after story that police officers were running around dispersing people who weren't social distancing in public, even on Mount Royal, but disproportionately the people that were being harassed were citizens of color. And at one point we had the situation where if two people were sitting in a car, and particularly at Atwater Market, where I had 6 couples come to me with complaints, and a police officer would come up to their door and ask for identification, and if their identification didn't show that the two were living under one roof, they got a ticket. Now, in a couple of cases I've had that reversed, but the point is, in speaking to police officers, they admit that is not a law. In the space on the ticket where you would normally see the section of the highway code or anything else, what the infraction was, it simply said ordre public, santé publique. So in speaking to officer after officer, I would get the following response. They would say, no, it's not technically breaking the law, but we were told by our commanders to use our common sense to keep people apart. So I would say, and you interpreted giving $1,500 tickets as part of common sense, and they would astoundingly answer me, we were told by our commanders that's part of our arsenal. This is past just violations of civil rights, but how does one address a situation, a mentality, as you said, where the police officers themselves, without exception of the ones I've talked to, admitted that this is not a violation of any law, so they're doing things for public order that have no backing in law.
This is why, look, we have some people who have come to see us. We have to getting $1,500 fines, and for young people under 18, it's $500. I believe the data, both across the country and in Montreal, have shown a disproportionately, you mentioned so, that people of color and people in low-income neighborhoods tend to get those very hefty fines. Certainly before the municipal court, when it comes to contesting these fines, certainly we will help people raise some of those issues, because we believe somewhere there's an abuse of power, somewhere there's an excess of authority, and somewhere there's a disproportionate targeting in terms of when they decide to give out the tickets. To tell people that you need to respect social distancing as a warning, it's something, but to follow through with a $1,500 fine, that could raise, especially if it can show that there's a pattern of targeting. Because, it's basically a practice or an action on the part of an agent of the state. Usually you have to follow what is the overriding state objective. If the objective to keep people safe, to ensure that people don't get infected and spread the disease, that there will possibly more, shall we say, more effective way and more common sense way of enforcing that state directive. In this case, we do know that there are certain abuse of power, especially we have some people who said the very police officer that came to tell us to go stand apart and to give a ticket, they didn't even wear a mask. They basically touched us, and they really came really close to us. So there are certain things that we will have to, hopefully will raise in the municipal court when it comes to having the hearings over these tickets.
And we have a constitutional principle in Canada that penalties, certainly including tickets, cannot be merely punitive in nature. So when you have tickets, as you said, it's one thing to give a warning, but $1,500 fines at a time when people are losing their livelihoods can drive people into bankruptcy. That cannot be interpreted as anything but punitive.
Not only
there's no other motive behind it.
That's right. You mentioned a very important legal principle there, but let me speak to this more human dimension of the way that these fines are given out. If we can prove that many of these tickets are given out to low-income neighborhoods, basically a $1,500 fine, and sometimes a whole family can get the fine. Yeah. Basically, we can say that disproportionately have a disproportionate adverse impact on people of low income, and especially with these people also are members of racial minorities. So we can make a case of constitutional equal protection and equal benefit of the law under the Canadian Charter to say that these fines, these practices and these actions basically are not only aimed to punish people in terms of under the law, but also punish them at every level possible and drive them into economic hardship. So, is it really worth it? And it's something, in times of crisis, we've known that the state tends to engage in policies and practice that they may violate the Constitution. And that's why we have to come back to the notion that we have to ensure that the constitutional protections are there, especially in times of crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic.
As Benjamin Franklin once wrote, those who would trade permanent liberty for temporary security shall in the end have neither liberty nor security. And people, the broad public, tends to fall asleep. Fo, let me end by asking you, through this whole summer, and let's put COVID aside, to the whole summer of an increasing raising of consciousness about the fact that we have not finished our work on race relations. You have almost a day-to-day contact with security authorities. Have you found that in Montreal there's an effort on the part of police to sensitize their cops on the beat to what is happening in all our communities?
I would, shall we say, I would deform the truth substantially if I say yes. First of all, we don't see any kind of...
You've got your diplomatic face on. I know what that means.
This is a substantial, basically, rollback on many of the gains of the 90s of the year 2000 on dealing with diversity within the police department and how the police deals with diversity in the city of Montreal. We don't even know who the senior managers are. We don't, even in hate crimes, we don't even have, as a city, a hate crimes unit. Can you believe that? We
I,
don't have a coordinated approach. We don't even have the data on hate crime from the police.
I thought
So that
I
changes
thought we had
something.
a hate crimes unit at Timmins.
I'm sorry?
I thought we had a hate crimes unit headquartered at Timmins, but
We had one, but now it's basically it seems it starts from scratch. We don't have, we deal with, for example, some Asian people who have been beaten up because of the COVID-19 stigma. And some of us have told them since being assaulted, they have no follow-up on the police, they have no information. One Chinese man we're helping right now doesn't even know that he can apply for state compensation for crime victims. That's a kind of problem that we have with the Montrealese. In the old days, we know managers, we know people. Police director engaged in outreach, talking to community leaders. When Marc Baron was there, he knew a lot of community leaders by name.
I remember
Uh,
that. I was about to bring
right.
it up that when that we all
And
had a
this
lot of
needs
hope when Perron became chief because he made a point of being involved in outreach to communities. And what a lot of people don't know, and I want our viewers to know this, Faux has been involved in the issue of race relations, not just in his own at CRARR that he founded, but he goes back to the 90s as an advisor to the Quebec government, the Commission on Human Rights, and even the Montreal Police on security and race relations. So he's been there from the beginning, as we say. So what happened? Everybody had a lot of hopes for Padon, but they didn't somehow trickle down.
It seems that since the departure of Marc Baron, we've had quite a lot of turmoil at the top in the police department. And we've had police chief or top managers who don't have the community connection. The present police chief, I don't believe he speaks English. He has not been able to reach out to many, possibly half of the people of Montreal. And we have a problem there. The police cannot function effectively without being with and behind and aside the public and vice versa. But
What
if the
astounded me
police,
about this chief
I,
is that early in March, and I wrote an editorial about this, 8 days before Montreal declared any kind of emergency, the police gave themselves emergency powers. I didn't even know they were allowed to do that, but there is in the Police Act. They, by themselves, without civilian authority, gave themselves emergency powers. And that astounded me.
yes. Well, so we've had basically a certain kind of leadership at the Montreal Police Department that does not seem to be able to connect with the different communities in French or in English. And that is a fundamental problem. How do we end up with that issue? That's something that hopefully eventually the mayor and the Quebec government should explain, because we cannot have a top police official in a city like Montreal who cannot communicate with half the city, who does not reach out to and make an effort to know community leaders by name, to visit community centers and religious institutions. And basically we need to have repaired that bond that has been absent or been compromised in the last few years. And if we don't have a top messenger at the helm to send the message through deeds and words, can you imagine what the police officers on the front line is getting in terms of the message? They feel that they community relations and working positively with people in the neighborhood is not a priority.
No,
If
they're
they're just to enforce the law and issue the fines instead of helping people understand the law and to conduct themselves a way to be safe for self and others, then we end up with basically a police officer being the machine to issue fines and arrest.
they basically have been given a laissez-faire, knee-jerk, whatever you need on the street, we'll back you up, and that's dangerous. Now, Faux, we're going to be there for you and following you and obviously giving you whatever editorial support we can. Do you know what date you're going on in front of the consultation?
Well, the consultation will be September the 1st. People can go online to the City of Montreal website and look for information on how to participate. We don't believe that there will be much time for each presentation during the consultation. It's online, it's virtual. more importantly, we're reassessing right now what can we say when what we want to say has been addressed by the Quebec policy that was released 2 days ago. You don't feel like you have the rug pulled under our feet with regard to having these Montrealers making input into the Montreal police policy, because the people in Quebec City have already decided for us what that policy shall be.
Well, perhaps it's time for somebody to say that. And from
Well,
Montreal,
we need to say that because we believe that ultimately the urban democracy of the powers of our city councilors could be compromised when it comes to oversight of the police department and police services, when all the decisions are made by people in Quebec City without any community contact, input, or participation, knowing full well that street checks and racial profiling affect disproportionately, if not exclusively, members of minorities, and these people were never consulted.
And in urban areas. Niemi, many thanks for being here with us today, but more importantly, many thanks for the work that you do. If you didn't exist, we'd have to invent you, even though people wouldn't want that. And we'll certainly be there by your side going forward, as we have been for years. And let me just say, I think of all the dozens of programs we've already recorded, I think this one is the best background. So I'm in my study that's now a studio, and I love the art behind you. So this is the most colorful backgrounds we've had.
Thank you very much. Perfect for a Sunday show.
Sorry?
Perfect for a Sunday show.
Absolutely. Niemi, Executive Director of the Center for Research on the Center for Regulations and Action Research. Many thanks and good luck going forward.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Take care.
And you too. And to all our viewers and readers, good luck and good day. Thanks very much for being here.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pope. Have a good one.